Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. I believe it is now 6 o'clock, so I want to make sure we get to maximize every moment here. My name is Ben Spratt. I'm a rabbi in New York City, and I know I join all of you and so many others around the world with profound gratitude to the Oxford Interfaith Forum, and specifically real gratitude to the leadership of Dr. Thea Gomolari. So Thea, thank you so much for helping to continue to gather us, bring forward the chances for wisdom and the fellowship that comes through communal learning. We are very, very blessed today to get to have the chance to learn with a real scholar and a leader in her field, and deeply honored to get to introduce for us all today, Professor Henrike Lähnemann. So it is a joy to welcome her as the chair of the Medieval German Literature and Linguistics at the University of Oxford. But she is actually speaking to us today, not actually from University of Oxford, but from Freiburg, where she spends 2 months a year as the Senior Research Fellow at the Freiburg Institute of Advanced Studies. So Henrike's main research interest currently is on late medieval devotional literature in Latin and Low German from North German convents. For the quincentenary of the German Reformation in 2017, she developed with the Tellurian Institute, the Modern Languages Library in Oxford, a project translating, printing, and singing the Reformation, which linked her first to the Oxford Psalm Network and now to the Oxford Interfaith Forum's Psalms and Interfaith Contexts Reading Group. Henrike works with the Oxford Bach soloists and is herself a keen singer of hymns, having grown up in the Protestant German tradition of church music. Henrike also has a rich family history in interfaith relations, and we are so grateful, actually, to be welcoming here as a part of this, actually, her father, Johannes Lähnemann, who's a prominent German Protestant theologian and religious educator, and set up and chairs the German section of World Religions for Peace in Nuremberg. He's the initiator and co-organizer of the Nuremberg Forums and is a recipient of multiple awards, including the Helby Peace Prize for services in Christian-Islamic dialogue. As a student, Henrike regularly interpreted at conferences on world religions and peace education organized by her father. So Henrike will introduce some of her current work in the course of the talk tonight. So I'm only going to mention books of hers which link with theological topics. So first and foremost, an edition of the 11th century bilingual Song of Songs commentary by William of Ebersberg, and several volumes on the reception of the Book of Judith in medieval literature and art. We are deeply honored that we get to welcome the wisdom of Professor Lähnemann. Turn it over to you.
Many thanks, Ben, for the very kind introduction. And I'm very pleased to be with you all on Zoom. And I'm also very pleased that it's possible to include a congregational element, because one of the topics I want to explore today when looking at Psalm 46 is how the Psalms have been a strengthening element for community building and singing in hope and defiance, not just for an individual prayer, but for a whole congregational setting. As is the usual way here, we'll start the session by reciting the psalm both in Hebrew and in English. Ben will be reading to us the Hebrew version, and for the English version, I've decided to pick the version that is sung daily in England in congregational setting, namely the Book of Common Prayers version, which goes back to the Bible translation of Myles Coverdale. And Myles Coverdale, in turn, was influenced in his psalm translation, but even more in his hymn production by Martin Luther and the whole Reformation movement in Germany and the drive to translate the Bible into the vernacular. And what I want to show is that also singing is a form of translation and outreach of the Psalms. You see here on the title slide the title in Myles Coverdale's Ghostly Psalms and Spiritual Songs, which is still has the Latin title Deus Noster Refugium from the Vulgate, also still has the Vulgate numbering. So for him, it's the 45th Psalm at that point, but is picking up Martin Luther's hymn Ein feste Burg, which will be at the core of today's presentation. The Myles Coverdale's translation in the Book of Common Prayers will be presented to us in the form in which it is sung currently. If I were in Oxford now, I would sing it in the chapel of the college I'm in. And the four singers you'll hear as a consort singing it consist partly of Oxford people, one of my colleagues from St. Edmund Hall, with whom I've quite often sung exactly this psalm in this setting, and his wife, who is a physicist based in Braunschweig, and two Braunschweig further singers, which they recruited very last moment. So I'm very grateful to Oliver Gesine and the group for presenting it to us. So first over back to Ben to read to us the Hebrew. I would encourage you to listen out to the beautiful sound of the psalm, and particularly to the Selah that ends each section of the psalm and shows that it's one of the liturgical psalms to be recited in section by the whole group of singers. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you so much, Henrike. Lamanatseach libnei korach al almot shir, Elohim lanu machaseh va'oz, Ezra b'tzarot nimsa ma'od, al kin lo nira b'hamir aretz, uv'mot harim b'lev yamim, yamu yechmeru meimav, yorashu harim begavato sela, nahar plagav yisamachu ir Elohim, Kadosh Mishkanei Elyon, Elohim Bikirba Bal Timot, Ya'azra Elohim Livnot Boker, Hamu Goyim Matu Mamlachot, Natan Bekolo Tamug Aretz, Adonai Tzvaot Imanu, Miskav Lanu Elohei Yaakov Sela, Luchu Chazu Mifalot Yeva, Ya Adonai Asher Sam Shamot Ba'aretz, Mashbit Milchamot, Ad Katsei Haaretz Keshet Yashber, Bekitzei Tzchanit Agalot Yisrof Ba'esh, Harpu Ud'u Ki Anochi Elohim, Arum Bagoyim, Arum Ba'aretz, Adonai Tzvaot Imanu, Miskav Lanu Elohei Yaakov Sela.
God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear though the earth be and though the mountains be toppled into the depth of the sea. Though its waters rage and foam, and though the mountains tremble at its tumult, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold.
There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be overthrown. God shall help her at the break of day. The nations make much ado, and the kingdoms are shaken. God has spoken, and the earth shall melt away. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold.
Come now and look at the works of the Lord. What awesome things he has done on earth. It is he who makes war to cease in all the world. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear, and burns the shields with fire. Be still then, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of Moses reigns. The God of Jacob is strong.
Selah. Many thanks to the consort for bringing across, I think, quite strongly this sense of ritual coming together of a group, reassuring themselves of the hope of having the Lord of Hosts as stronghold and refuge. And it's this overarching sense of the support that is then leading to the reception history. Before I come to the Psalm 46, I have to contextualize it in the by looking at the role that Psalms play for the development of the Reformation in Germany. The book of Psalms was probably the book closest to the heart of Martin Luther, who had grown up with with the Augustinians reciting the Psalms daily. So when he was made professor at a young age at the University of Wittenberg and was offered to pick a book to lecture, to base his first lecture series on, he picked the book and did a really good didactic move. He had the Wittenberg printers prepare a special textbook for his lecture series. You can see on the right-hand side, it's double-spaced printing. Each of the students had to buy one and then to take lecture notes. And the copy you see here on the right-hand side is Luther's own copy and his notes that he took. And so that really allows us to trace the development of his theology through this lecture series. And you see in the title for the psalm here, he entitles this Exaltation of Christ to his people. So his starting point is that he reads Christ into the Psalter and understands all of the Psalms as Christological statements. This is important to keep in mind when then looking at his Psalm translation. So Luther's engagement with the Psalms precedes what then later became adopted as the official starting point for the Reformation, the publication in 1517 of the 95 Theses. And then he realized soon that it wasn't, he wasn't reaching a wide enough audience with a Latin text, but he started translating first the 95 Theses into German, but also bullet points don't really make the cut. What reaches out is if you allow people to read for themselves, and that was then exactly 500 years ago in 1522 on the Wartburg, he translated the New Testament from Greek, published in September, and when he returned with a finished manuscript to Wittenberg, he at the same time issued a call to other reformers in the vicinity to take to versifying biblical texts. And among them, at the first place, were the Psalms. He himself set an example by taking one of the penitential Psalms, so the Psalms that were at the core of the monastic devotion, out of the depth I call to thee, Psalm 130, the one you discussed a month ago. And it then went like a wildfire. So we know that broadsheets with single hymns were printed, and the first hymn book is actually just a gathering together of 8 of these hymns in a little booklet, followed in the same year by an enchiridion, something you can hold in your hand and take with you, of spiritual songs and psalms. In the same year, he produced the first translation of the Psalter into German, 1524, which then underwent several revisions. He started with a fair version of the Psalter, fairly close to the Hebrew, and then made it more and more into a vernacular rhetoric that made the Psalter usable as personal prayer book or songbook, actually. The Psalm 46 for the first time was printed in 1529 in an enlarged hymn book. And he justified his choice of, for example, including Christological elements in translating the Psalms in 1530 in his Sendbrief vom Dolmetschen. And then Coverdale's translation, the one you saw on the title slide, the Goostly Psalms and Spiritual Songs, are a testimony how quickly these songs traveled across Europe. So Coverdale probably picked them up in the Netherlands, where he was traveling to have his Bible published. Anyway, he included in his translation already songs like Ein feste Burg, which had just been written. And then in 1534, Luther produces the first full Bible with a revised Psalter included. And Coverdale immediately used it to revise his Bible translation into English, because Coverdale had the unfinished manuscript of Tyndale, who was incarcerated at that point on the way to be executed. And Coverdale had the huge task of finishing it without having adequate Greek and Hebrew. So he translated from the Vulgate, but he was using Martin Luther's translation and the Zurich translation of the Reformed Circle there, which was closer to the Hebrew and Greek text, to correct his translation from the Vulgate. So a kind of really European network of translating from the original languages into the vernacular, but also translating into song, all interlinked. So to show how Luther is marrying tunes and text, I want to briefly look at his setting of Psalm 130, where he wrote a bespoke tune to mirror the emotional setup of the psalm. Aus tiefer Not schrei ich zu dir, Herr Gott, erhör mein Rufen. Dein gnädig Ohren kehrt zu mir, und meine Bild sie öffnen. Denn so du willst das sehen an, wie manche Sünd ich abgetan, wer kann Herr vor dir bleiben? He's using the medieval church tone of the Phrygian mode, which is the darkest of the four church modes, and he matches the expression of deep with the deepest note and the sin with the highest note, these and spans all the emotion between these two extremes. And I've put Coverdale's translation above it so that you can see he is very close to the psalm text. He only varies it in tiny but telling details. So instead of out of the depths, he says out of deep pain, Not, and instead of I call to you, it's ich schrei, I cry to you. But also this kind of extremity of despair is matched by the extremity of God's mercy. So it's not just the ears of God that are listening to him, but the gnädig Ohren, the gracious ears, the merciful ears that are opening to him. I could speak for the whole session about that, but we need to go to Psalm 46. So you can see how I've marked in bold the hymns in the first collection of hymns, how many of these are based actually on Psalms. So 3 out of the 8 are Psalm versions in the first, and that continues in the full hymn book from 1524, the Enchiridion. You have 7 psalm paraphrases, and the linking mode between these is the call for mercy, which we already had seen with Aus tiefer Not. And all of these are fairly close psalm paraphrases, so they would have been acceptable even to the then Reformed tradition, which only allows exact the wording of the Bible and nothing else to be sung. Then comes his translation of the Psalter, and it's a marked change afterwards. So once he had put the German, the Psalter Deutsch out there, people could read for themselves what was written literally in the Psalms. And that makes him freer then in his verse forms to put additional theological elements into it. So when he then goes into his version of Psalm 46, which he still entitles as Psalm 46, only the first verse is based on the psalm, and it's not a line by line versification that we had seen from Aus tiefer Not, but it's rather taking the whole essence of the psalm, condenses it as in a summary in the first verse, and then takes off into an interpretation of what this actually means in the here and now in the following verses. I've marked here in bold the elements that he has taken over, and what he has taken over is mainly the congregational response. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our stronghold. That's the basic line that he wants to stress. And the tune he uses for this is markedly different from the one that we had heard. I'd said it's the Phrygian mode, a church, and this now is in a major mode. So it's very bright sounding tune, and it has a marked cross rhythm. I've sung it slowly out of tiefer Not, while this requires to be sung quickly, and borrows elements actually from dance song, contemporary dance songs. And it's a kind of dance of defiance and hope that is performed. And that reflects both his new freedom, since he could refer people who wanted to have the literal meaning to his psalm translation, and it also reflects the changed and more politicized situation of the late 1520s. So what we are going to do now is I'm going to sing the first verse on my own, and then everybody is joining in here. And since you're all muted, you are very welcome also to join in, as long as you don't unmute yourself. During lockdown, we had a series of video podcasts, which we called Singing Together Apart, where we had a small group of singers in the crypt of St. Edmund Hall, and a colleague in the Bodleian Library turning the pages from a medieval liturgical manuscript, and we were singing from the medieval manuscript in the medieval setting, and people around the world were joining in. So you are welcome also to join in to this tune. Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott, ein gute Wehr und Waffen. Hilft uns frei aus aller Not, die uns jetzt hat betroffen. Der altböse Feind mit Ernst es jetzt meint, groß Macht und viel ist, sein grausam Rüstung ist, auf Erd ist nichts seinesgleichen. Mit unserer Macht ist nichts getan, wir sind gar bald verloren. Streit für uns der rechte Mann, die Gott hat selbst erhoben. Fragst du, wer er ist? Er heißt Jesus Christ, der Sieger und ist kein anderer Gott. Das Feld muss er behalten. Und wenn die Welt voll Teufel wird und wollt uns gar verschlingen, so fürchten wir uns nicht so sehr, es soll uns doch belegen. Der Vögel dieser Welt, wie sauer er sich stellt, tut uns doch nicht, das macht er ist Gericht. Ein Gott kann nicht fällen. Das Wort, sie sollen Rasen starren und kein Dank dazu haben. Er ist bei uns und auf dem Plan mit seinem Geist und Gaben. Nehmen Sie ihn in sein Gut, er klingt und reift. Lass fahren dahin, sie haben's kein Gewinn, das Reich muss uns doch bleiben. I'll come back to the theological implications of these verses 2 to 4. I first want to finish the historical run through, because then comes Myles Coverdale's translation into English. Since we are getting on in time, I skip most of the preface, even though it's great fun, because you can actually, so a short plug for our edition series. Under editions MML, OX, AC, UK, you can read the full text of Myles Coverdale's hymn book, including the address to the reader, where he says, "Go, little book, be not ashamed, I warrant thee, though thou be rude in song and rhyme, thou shalt to youth some occasion be in godly sports to pass their time." He publishes it to replace ballads of filthiness, he calls it, with ballads of God's glory. So this was edited last year by a group of students, of graduate students in Oxford. And you can see he keeps the rhythmical tune. He keeps the caption as psalm, and he takes over the rhyme scheme of Luther. He has some difficulties, as have later translators, with a German tendency to have two-syllable rhymes at the end. And English has far fewer two-syllable words. So overall, I'll sing you just a couple of lines, and even though I practice it a lot, it's still hard going. Oh, God is the defense and tower, a good armor and good weapon. He hath been ever our help and succor in all the troubles that we have been in. So I won't go on. It's not poetically too convincing. But what's interesting is that he takes out all of the Christological content that Martin Luther has put in. So I've put on the bottom right-hand side literal translation of Luther's hymn into English, and above it is Coverdale's version, and he only keeps from Luther the emphasis on the word of God, which is the help and stronghold. But he doesn't explain what Luther puts in, that for Luther, the word of God is Christ who is helping in trouble. But he keeps the link between the promises of the Psalms and the New Testament content by having marginalia. So you see 2 Corinthians 1a as reference to the Pauline letter, where he talks about all the tribulation through which the congregation in Corinth is going. And you see the reference to John 14. Again, there's a lot more I could say, and happy to expand in the discussion. But what he also puts in back is the congregational response. So he ends the third and the fifth verse, and the fifth verse is actually an addition by him, with the God of Jacob is our strong tower. So he reinfuses the psalm content into the translation of Luther's hymn, but takes over from Luther the tune and the defiant mode of the psalm. Now, this Coverdale was never received in England, and that's not because he was so bad at versifying, but rather because the book ended up on the index, and every copy, as far as we know, was burned, except for the one copy that survived in a Sammelband, which is in Queen's College, Oxford. And that brought vernacular singing in England to a halt even before it had taken on. While in Germany, as I said, it spread like wildfire. And part of it was because it was put into the hands of pretty much all Lutheran children and members of congregation. So you see left an illustration of how singing and reading actually was taught in schools in the Strasbourg area by putting a large volume. This is a downsized facsimile. I'll hand it round here among the congregation here. A more than A3 folio, which was marked up for congregational singing and for learning to read together with singing the hymns. So from the 1530s onwards, every generation of Lutheran school children grew up by singing psalms in this version. And you see still the title here saying Der 46. Psalm Deus Noster Refugium. So Luther's version becomes the German Psalter for most Lutherans. This I've now tried to make a parallel version of how the hymn took off in Germany and in the UK. And in Germany, it becomes omnipresent, so far that it also is taken over by the Jewish communities. So this is a photograph I took from a hymn book in Wolfenbüttel Library. Ein deutsches Gesangbuch für Israeliten zur Beförderung öffentlicher und häuslicher Andacht. On there it says, Melodie, ein feste Burg ist unser, etc. So everybody knew it was always costly to print music. So you had to, if you wanted to save money, you had to pick tunes that everybody would know. And this shows that in 19th century Germany, they could assume that every also Jewish school boy or girl would know to sing at home to the tune of Ein feste Burg. Interestingly enough, it's not Psalm 46, but it's a versification of a portion of Genesis, which is it's actually the binding of Isaac, which is set to Ein feste Burg. So the song of Defiance and Hope is matched to a new content, which also speaks of hope and for overcoming adversity. But the reception history is a deeply ambivalent history, which went really pretty much in all possible directions. It was established from the first centenary of the German Reformation as the set hymn for every jubilation. So in 1617 it was sung, and then every century for celebrating the publication of the 95 Theses. it was in all Protestant hymn books in the Baroque period. So J.S. Bach set a cantata to the text. In the Enlightenment, in the later 18th century, it was rewritten because it was thought of too kind of stark. So, and also it was thought that it might be misunderstood as speaking about secular success. So it was retitled Christ is the protection of his church, and ein starker Schutz ist unser Gott, a strong protection is our God, and all military metaphors were taken out. They were reinstated in the Romantic Revival. I've put on the left-hand side the title page of Des Knaben Wunderhorn, alte deutsche Lieder, a romantic collection project of what should have been folk songs, but this was included as a popular folk song under the title Kriegslied des Glaubens, war song of faith. And in that sense, it was then picked up by the democratic movements of the group going to the Waldburg Fest to celebrate together revolution and the Reformation, so that Heinrich Heine then called it the Marseillaise of the Reformation, because it was used in these kind of demonstration settings. And also secular revolutions, because again, they could rely on everybody knowing the tune, were rewriting it as ein feste Burg ist Mannesmut. So manly courage is a strong protection for freedom, truth, and virtue. And it was just a short and dangerous step then to be used in the Franco-Prussian War to identify the enemy that has to be overcome with France instead of the besetting nations. Meanwhile, in the UK, only in the 19th century, a song, congregational singing started, coming first from the Methodists, and then also being made popular by Prince Albert and the pop star of his generation, Moses Mendelssohn. So the tunes were taken over from the settings that Mendelssohn himself had taken from J.S. Bach's setting. And then in the 19th, 20th century, you have on the one hand the really nationalist continuation. So these are all postcards from World War I with quotations from Ein feste Burg to identify again the Germans as the one with whom God is, and everybody else as the devil that is besetting, but will be overcome by Christ. I've taken this material here in Freiburg is the Volksliedarchiv, and the director of the Volksliedarchiv has published in the Liederlexikon all of these versions. So in the 20th century, it comes to a clash of interpretation of the hymn. You have on the one hand, the nationalist reading of the hymn that had been prepared through the use in war context. And you have a reconsideration of the original dance of hope and defiance by the resistance movement during National Socialism, the so-called Bekennende Kirche, church confessant people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who were reviving the original text of the hymn and also the original rhythm, because in the 19th century, what had taken hold was a slowing down of the hymn. The congregation had got slower and slower in Bach's time. Then Mendelssohn slows it further down, and so the militarist singing would be Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott, and that would be used to open every meeting of a nationalist setting, while the confessing church would answer with the rhythm of the Reformation. Das Wort sie sollen lassen stehen und kein Dank dazu haben. So in the resistance strand, particularly the fourth verse was used, where it said the word will overcome adversity. So this has been a very whistle stop through 5 centuries of singing this hymn, which has had has lasted, because I would say Luther highlighted in his rendering 3 elements of the original psalm. The psalm as emotional theology, as communal worship, and as protest song, turning it into a hymn of hope and defiance. Thank you.
My goodness, incredible. Okay, thank you. That was incredible. So much to take in here. So I want to make sure we get to use our precious moments with you, and I imagine there are a number of questions. So if you have a question, want to invite everyone to raise your virtual hand, or you can do this or write into the chat. I would love just to open with the questions, if you're willing, Henrike, if I could just jump in here with a question here. What was in the air that made Martin Luther feel the need to reclaim or maybe activate these psalms in a new way? Was this an inherited tradition, this notion of rehashing, reformulating psalms with a different direction and orientation? Was this one of his innovations?
I think psalms have always been adapted to answer the whatever personal needs people were in, and my main research area is actually late medieval devotional writing, and the nuns I'm working on do pretty much the same. They take psalms and write meditations on them, and so what Luther is doing is, I think he starts with a monastic spirituality of meditating, ruminating on the Psalms, and kind of externalizing this rumination, combining it with a move of a lay singing, and we know that this really took on. So we have reports on Protestant congregations standing up during Mass if a Catholic priest didn't preach to their liking. They would start instead singing these psalm hymns. And that's actually a form of protest which also the nuns did, sometimes against Lutheran ministers. So they say, we know they sang media mitten wie im Leben, media in vita in morte sumus, in Latin, to interrupt Protestant. So it was a tried and tested form of interrupting and protesting.
Amazing. I love that. I see Dr. Reinhard Cross has his hand. Please, Dr. Cross.
He did in among other things in his this first lecture series on the Psalms, and putting the titles, the Christological titles into this psalm, he acts in a completely medieval way. There was a saying, if Nicolaus of Lyra hadn't written his Psalter commentary in which he did it, Luther couldn't have done. Lyra non lyrasset, Lutherus non psaltasset. So if Nicolaus of Lyra hadn't already paved the way of understanding the Psalter in this Christological way, Luther wouldn't have been able to take off with his interpretation. Having these kind of framework for understanding the Psalms is in the Middle Ages established, and understood especially in a monastic context where the Psalms would be recited within a Christian liturgy. They would normally end with a doxology after, so praise to God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit after each psalm. So it's a framework he grew up with, but it's underscored for him by his understanding of the whole Bible from what he calls the center of Scripture, die Mitte der Schrift. And he says all of the Bible have to be understood starting from Christ as the Word incarnate. If Christ is the Word incarnate, this also applies to the Psalms. It doesn't just apply to the words he said out aloud, as it were.
It may be difficult to get into the mind of Coverdale here, but I'm curious, why do you think he chose to remove the Christological references that Luther had brought into this? What was the motivation for that in your, I guess, in your estimation, your understanding?
I think it's the reason I said Luther became freer to put more theology in once he had provided the literal translation of the Psalter. And Coverdale wasn't at that point. Coverdale's Bible translation finishes later. I've no proof, of course, for this theory, but perhaps if Coverdale had finished already his English Psalter, he would have felt less compelled to stick to the literal text of the Psalter in his hymn. There would be so much more to explore, and I haven't really looked at the Reformed Psalm paraphrases for this, and I would love to do more on that. And I would also be very interested to hear how from the Jewish side, really how this congregational element can still be staged, or whether it's used. And what we know, I checked with my godfather, Rudolf Sment, who is retired professor of Old Testament, how he would think how it would have been performed at the whenever it was written, and he said it might have been one of the Psalms to be really sung during processional use, but I don't know enough about that.
To the end of the hour, on behalf of everyone, want to offer profound gratitude. Henrike, this was so fascinating. And thank you also to your quartet for bringing voices into this. So I want to make sure we offer some gratitude to you all. Thank you. Again, I think it's so interesting as you lifted up, not only how the text of the psalm, but even the emphasis through music that can change the meaning and all these different poetic devices. So thank you for helping to illustrate that for all of us. I know you haven't publicly offered this as well, but I'm sure that people, as they sit in this, may have additional questions. I hope they can reach out directly to you. Thank you. This was a gift for all of us. Yeah. And Thea, once again, gratitude to you for organizing us into the Oxford Interfaith Forum, for making this learning possible. I know one of the things I need to do is give a nod to the next part of this series here. So I want to make sure everyone flags your calendars for the 22nd of September. This is going to be on Psalm 19, Muslim Reflections on Creation. We're grateful to Thea for helping to make sure that we have Dr. Zeynep Sayiligan, the Muslim scholar at the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies in Maryland here in the United States, followed by, again, a Q&A just like we had today. Wishing everyone a wonderful evening or morning, whatever you may be, the time may be where you are. Thank you again, Henrike, for bringing your wisdom, your voice into this, and such a gift for all of us as we move forward.
Thanks a lot.